You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. If you'd like to learn more about the Bearded Theologians, you can go online at beardedtheologians.com, where we have past podcasts, blogs, and a couple items for sale. So check us out, beardedtheologians.com. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this week's show.
You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
So this week on the podcast, as we conclude our Lenten series, looking at cherry-picked bumper sticker Bible verses. What a great name for a book. Maybe we should write this book. Cokesbury, if you're listening, please reach out to us. But to kind of conclude this series of looking at scriptures that are usually kind of taken out of context and misused appropriately, we're going to look at one for Holy Week in general, and it's Matthew 21, 12 through 17. And so, Zach, if you want to do what you do with it, I'll let you have at it.
Yeah. So, let's just jump right on into the reading. I guess in the weeks past, we've read a single verse. Today, we're going to read a whole story because the whole story, it just gets cherry picked. All right, here from Matthew 21, 12 through 17. Then Jesus entered the temple and drove out all who were selling and buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. He said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called the house of prayer, but you make it a den of robbers." The blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he cured them. But when the chief priests and the scribes saw the amazing things he did and heard the children crying out in the temple, "Hosanna to the Son of David," they became angry, and they said to him, "Do you hear what they are saying?" Jesus said to them, "Yes. Have you never read, out of the mouths of infants and nursing babies, you have prepared praise for yourself?" He left them and went out of the city to Bethany and spent the night there. That as you hear this classic Jesus story, especially in the midst of Holy Week, how in your world have you seen this cherry picked?
It's been used as a way of allowing people to say that Jesus showed violence. Is always one way I've always heard it used. Mm-hmm. That's where I always point out, maybe you should read it a little bit closer, because that's not exactly, he uses violence, but not in the way that we would want to use violence, in a way. And I would suspect that there's more to the story. Mm-hmm. Like, if you just read it as is, it seems like if you just read it as is from surface level, it's like he just walked in and all this, like he just like came in and just like, boom. I'm sure, knowing, like, at least the way I understand Jesus said, "Hey, you need to go. It's time for you to go." And I'm sure it escalated, because mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know. That's how it feels. I may be wrong. I'm not there. We don't have YouTube evidence of it. So, it is what it is. But I also think too, the struggle with this is that, because it's used to advocate violence, mm-hmm. The struggle is how do we reconcile that? Right. How do we reconcile? Because if you think about it, here in a few, like even in a couple chapters later, we see where Peter's going to go go to battle, and Jesus has, and it's in the Gospel of Matthew where he says, "Those who live by the sword die by the sword." So, like, mm-hmm. How do you reconcile this, Zach Bechtold?
Right. Well, and you're right. It's most often, that's been my experience. It's most often been to justify violence and anger, but less so much of Jesus's. Right. Because there's almost an implied or understood, well, it's righteous anger, right? Jesus comes in, there's a purpose, the context of what's going on. People are being taken advantage of for being sold doves at a unreasonable price to take advantage of the poor. And sure, makes sense that Jesus gets mad, runs the people out, flips tables. But I think then we take that and say, Well, they messed up my order at Applebee's, and so I flipped some tables. Right, we use it to justify our own anger that I wouldn't consider righteous anger. Um, in most places, we can't use this story of Jesus going in and seeking justice for the oppressed in these moments in the midst of the temple, for being a Karen in public for us. It's just not. but I think that's most often what we do. Well, Jesus got angry, so I can get angry. Jesus yelled and flipped tables, so I can yell and flip tables. Well, no, not necessarily. And I think what opens that up for me, one, Jesus had a purpose, like you said. It likely escalated in all of the interactions that Jesus has with people, right? There's obviously more to the story. There's more conversation. There's more that we don't have in ramping up to what's written down. But then what we leave out, I think, when we think about this story is, yeah, Jesus got angry. He flipped tables. He ran the folks out. But then he invited the blind and lame in, and he cared for them. He healed them. All the while, the chief priests and the scribes followed in behind him and were like, what is going on? What are we doing? Don't you hear these people? And Jesus is like, yeah, haven't you read? You guys are the ones who read. You're the priests and the scribes. Haven't you heard? These are the things that will happen. And I think that's the really important part that we leave out. One, Jesus isn't just acting in anger and violence. There's purpose and liberation and oppression happening that he's seeking justice for. And then he invites the people in. He invites the lame and the blind in to heal them. And I think in our own self-righteous anger and violence, we forget that part. It's not good enough just to be angry and violent about something. To seek justice and healing in response of is the important part.
Well, and I think that's the struggle that we all face, is that how do we, yes, there are things that are to make us angry, and how we respond matters. And yes, I do think there are times when we can get agitated, and I there are definitely times when you need to defend yourself. If you're being attacked, I think there are ways you can protect yourself. I mean, I'm not I think that's always the tension to hold, but I always think that like how we present ourselves matters in this world. And I think of so this actually happened on Sunday. We went to Subway after church. So I kind of like, what was due? Sitting at Subway, and this poor man at Subway, I really wish I would have had cash because I would have given him a tip. He was only by himself, in a church rush, by himself trying to do sandwiches. But then the line in the pickup line got longer and longer and longer. And I just felt, I felt really bad for this guy. I was very patient with him as he was trying to navigate things with us. And, he did a great job of making our sandwiches. And we were sitting there eating, and then in walks this woman who I knew had been like, she angrily pulled into the restaurant, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. Like, just kind of like, she's going to get angry. And I knew she had been at church, not only just by the way she was dressed, but she was carrying her church bulletin in her purse as she walked in, stormed in. I was like, oh, this is going to be good. This is going to be one of those moments where church people are making us look bad. And it makes my job that much harder. And I started lamenting a little bit, like, dear Lord, please. Like, I mean, I literally like entered into this kind of prayerful, like, dear Lord, don't make this be one of those moments. And that woman was probably one of the most graceful people I'd ever seen walk in a situation where you could tell she was agitated. You could tell that, she was flustered, that she, had to come into the restaurant. You could tell that, it was not what she wanted to do, but yet she was so great when she saw the situation and recognized what was happening. She just took took a pause and, reasserted herself and was very graceful in the whole moment. And I think that a lot of those situations, church folk give us a bad name on Sundays after church because most of the time when they go to restaurants, they're horrible. And I think of, Zach and I both have been watching The Righteous Gemstones, and I would hate to clean up the messes that they leave after seeing some of those episodes. and I think that that's like how we present ourselves in culture matters. And here, like, no, like what Jesus is doing here, there's obviously got to be more to the story. But I also think too, in the story, it's not an excuse for us to use violence.
Right.
I'm just gonna,
absolutely,
if you can't take this one thing and just it trumps all of what Jesus says about being a peacemaker. You just can't do that. And so I think that's where I want to hold that into tension as we think about this, scripture anyway.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's not permission for violence. It's not permission for anger. It's not permission for getting our way. That's not what Jesus is doing here. He's not flipping tables to get his way. He's flipping tables because there's injustice, right? And he's making space for the oppressed. And often, I would venture to say that's not what we're doing, whether it be in restaurants or airports when our flights are delayed and we yell at folks there, or are driving down the highway and somebody cuts us off and we throw a finger out the window with a Christian fish on the back of the car, right? That's not righteous anger. And that's not what this verse or this whole story justifies, right? But yet I think we fall into that trap of using it that way far too often than we ever should.
Yeah, and I think that that's the tension that we have to hold into is how are we going to present ourselves in a situation when, you know, that could lead to anger, and like how do we respond? That's hard. I'm not gonna say it's easy. It's, you know, it's something I definitely work on or attempt to work on quite frequently, and I think that we all have to hold that into tension on how to do that. And I think that that's just a vital way of handling it. So
yeah, and I think that's a good place to land for this Holy Week, right? Are we holding the tension of, you know, what we're called to be doing in seeking justice and liberation for the oppressed, in being in relationship in those ways, or are we just seeking to get what we want?
It's a good place to land today. And so we want to encourage you to go to our website at beardedtheologians.com and check out all of our past content and pick up some, Bearded Theologian shirts or hats or mugs or whatever. Toot your fanny. It's an old one. Yeah. I'm feeling a little bit 80. My hips are hurting today, so I feel 80 today. So, encourage you to do that. So, thank you for joining us today. And so for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
Guys, I want you to subscribe and like this video and push that thumbs up.
Thank you for listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share on all social media outlets. You can check out old episodes and more information at beardedtheologians.com. Thanks for checking us out.